you doing? That's the wrong song. Let it start the show.
With our special guest, Marc Furmie.
No way you got plugged. And we
That's
got
all I got. Anyways, this is the Subscript Pirate. You can at me at Subscript Pirate on that X. Or at DMB there, and I'll shoot you a link to join the show live with us. And you can click that little link in my profile and it'll take you to our Discord with all things dangerous thoughts. Anyways, let's get this show started.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Dangerous Thoughts. I thought we were playing a different intro, and I got all excited there. I got excited in my pants. So as you just heard, if you want to be on the show, if you want to show your pretty face and ask our special guest, Marc Furmie, writer, director extraordinaire, a sci-fi filmmaker, drama filmmaker. He does it all. He's a god of Hollywood. He'll be showing up. If you want to ask him any questions about his film or his life or what type of underwear he wears, you just come on and you send a DM over to Subscript Pirate at X, Twitter, for those of you that haven't heard. At Subscript Pirate, that's SUBSCRIPT, Pirate. And you can join us on the show later today and talk to me and Tyson and ask Marc some questions. So welcome to Dangerous Thoughts. This is the show where every week, me and my good buddy Tyson, my good buddy Tyson, we get together and we talk about, important shit that people aren't necessarily comfortable talking about. And we take a deep dive into it. Tonight, we'll be talking about the nature of reality. And we'll get an interesting perspective from our special guest, Marc Furmie, who's standing by, about to join the show any second now. Before we introduce him, oh, there he is. Bam! Wow! Boom. The nature of modern technology is like, whoa. How are you, man?
I'm good.
You're good.
I'm
You're good.
hanging out here in LA, weathering the strike storm, and seeing where that puts us.
Have you been walking the picket lines at all? Hanging out with the mob?
I haven't yet. I'm not technically a WGA member yet. I'm Australian, so I'm in the US on a work visa. So my visa is actually sponsored by the DGA.
All the films and etc. that you've written, though, I assume you can.
Yeah, I'm on probably a must join. It's strange. I mean, like the pandemic has been a strange time. It's kind of set everything. It's moved everything at a molasses pace. So that'll come eventually. I think we just need to pick up and get moving on a few things before that can happen.
Yeah, like the strike. We got to get moving past this thing. We'll see how long that happens. It's funny because like a lot of people, I've lost thousands and thousands and other people much more money because of the strike. But I've been asking for it for 20 freaking years now. So I don't have any issue with suffering through what I'm suffering through, because
not at all.
Our wages and the actors' wages, not just the actors, but directors, writers, every creative position in Hollywood has watched it has become unlivable for most people who, whether you're a wardrobe designer, whether you're a costume designer, same thing, whether you're a DP, AC, grip, everybody that's working on the sets, all the key positions, everybody's not getting paid what they should be getting paid.
And Manu, if you could, for the audience, and I want you to explain this, people, when they think of Hollywood actors, they think of the 1%, right? They think of even
the 1% aren't getting paid what they should be getting
right
paid.
Well, but the millionaires that have multiple homes. What about the 99% of actors who have apartments, who live paycheck to paycheck, who what about those actors? Like, the strike is about them and what they're not making right now. I mean, it's hard to believe that you could be in so many TV shows, so many movies, and for all intents and purposes, be poor.
Well, I'll tell you why it's hard to believe. It's because Hollywood has done such a good job. The studios and the system has done such a good job of showing the glitz and the glamour that if you work on television, everybody just assumes, or if you work in the movies, everybody just assumes you're filthy rich. It is the farthest thing from the truth. We're all working very, very hard to get our films and our television shows made and get paid for them as well. To just give you an example, more than 10 years ago, a actress friend of mine who had done 5 series as a star, not going to name her name because that would be cruel, but 5 series, 5 different leading series. She did a show, and this was about 10, 12 years ago. They offered her $6,000 an episode, no moving fee to go to a different city. They put her on the plane. That was nice of them. But no fee to move, no fee to pick up and get an apartment, etc. And $6,000 an episode. And I'm talking about a legitimate television star. And that's what they offered her for season 1. And then when streaming came along, they started doing all these crazy things like offering new media contracts for like almost no money. You're making a hundreds of $1 million television show, and you're getting paid new media rates. Crazy things were happening. And so the strike sucks. The one point I wanted to make about the strike this evening before we move on is there's another thing that I think not a lot of people are talking about. And Marc, maybe you can back me on this one, maybe you can't. I don't know what your opinion is, but I'd love to hear it. One, no one's talking about the reason that we make television, film, and tell stories, and no one's talking about the intense amount of military-industrial complex money, CIA money, war money, propaganda money. That funds a lot of these films and these war movies and et cetera. All sorts of little sneaky things get slipped into films, like pictures of an American flag when Spider-Man flies across his city to bolster, patriotism, which I have no problem with. I love my country, but there's all these, sort of like they call it television for a reason. It's programming for a reason. And there's a lot of money that, for me as an artist and for me as a filmmaker, I don't want to tell their story, their propaganda anymore. I want to tell stories about the human condition that matter without caveats and content that is slanted towards what they want me to make stuff about. So what do you think about that, Marc?
Well, I think you're spot on, and I think the way to do that is to disassociate from it, in a sense. I mean, we artists, we have the power, right? So we can band together. We can create stuff. The only thing we're lacking is financing. But if every artist were to get together in the old United Artists sort of sense of the word, Charlie Chaplin, and what he set out to do with that studio was to have something run by artists that was disconnected from the machine, from the interests of a government. I always think it's dangerous when art and politics collide, and it's obviously dangerous when the intelligence community and art collide, because then you get propaganda that is hard to separate from reality. So I think where we are at is, it's very interesting, because essentially the strike represents a moment in time where people are fed up with being exploited, but at the same time they need to kind of take the step out of the matrix and realize that the studios need them more than they need the studios ultimately. I mean, all it would take is the top 10% of the A-list to band together to finance something that and you'd have a lot of lenders come in and support that instantly. They wouldn't even have to put up their own private capital. But the problem is we're increasingly moving toward a technocracy, a technocratic system that is hell-bent on exploiting everybody across the board. It's not just artists, it's humanity. It's people in sweatshops in Asia or mines in Africa. It's or fast food joints here in America. It's we exist in a world that's increasingly driven by almost this God, that is not human. The very nature of a board of directors is it dehumanizes leadership, right? Because suddenly no one person has any say, and each person on the board becomes a slave to the board, which is like the corporate interest, which ultimately is profit. And so humanity is very good at creating its own, replacing its gods, and I think we just need to open our eyes and realize that artists are very powerful. We have historically been very powerful. I mean, artists can overthrow empires, and I think the technocrats know that. And increasingly, the movie studios have become more and more, under the purview of large hedge funds. We're long past the days of Robert Evans and Wassermans and Jack Warners. Where seeing, and these guys were, horrible in their own way, but at least they were kind of driven toward, making films, for an audience. And I think it's not just about films anymore.
Robert Evans was, I loved Robert Evans. I loved that.
He was amazing.
That recent biopic about the making of The Godfather was wonderful.
And The Offer.
Yeah, that was just a wonderful.
We're talking about this though at a micro level, right? We're talking about SAG-AFTRA, we're talking about the WGA, but I wish
IATSE and all the other unions were striking. To tell you the truth,
exactly. I think we're coming to a labor reckoning, right? Where labor, regardless of industry, whether it's UPS, whether it's even in healthcare where I work, labor is coming, to a reckoning with, we have management, leadership, executives, on one side, we have labor on the other. And, in the 1950s, my grandfather, who was a union man and had a family, single person working, my grandmother was a stay-at-home mom, dangerous thoughts. And, they bought a house. They put their kids through college. It was one person working. Today, you've got a couple that are working that can't afford childcare. The split between that executive and that frontline labor is just growing. You have executives that make more money than Tom Cruise, that make more money than some of the A-list actors. Why is that?
How about that big a-hole that was making $250 million a year that said we want all the writers and all the actors to starve and lose their homes before this thing is over?
Because that'll be sure, because they'll come back. They'll come back with a weaker contract, right? It's like, okay, we're starving. We'll work for peanuts. Just, don't let us lose our home. Don't let us. Of course, they're going to starve them out. They're going to drive them out of their homes so that they can get what they want. And then what happens to all those residuals? Oh, the execs get
They don't
richer.
exist anymore, by the way, for the most part.
Well, I mean, for the executives, not residuals for the.
Oh, for the execs, they're
right.
Yeah, sure. And could you imagine? Marc was saying, Marc had a great quote earlier. Here on Dangerous Thoughts, we try to keep some of the best quotes that we have on the show and slap them on stickers and T-shirts. Artists can overthrow an empire. I like that quite a bit. I think we should slap that on a sticker. So let's show these people a little bit about my buddy Marc here. Me and Marc met actually through an actor friend of mine, Jai Kutre, who, like me, should be a huge movie star, a fantastic freaking talent. Sorry, toot my own horn. But Jai is incredible talent. I cast him in a movie that I produced a little indie film called Benjamin Troubles, and then Marc cast him in a movie called Terminus. Do we have Marc's Terminus trailer ready? It's an incredible science fiction indie film. Everybody should see it. It's available. Check it out.
Nothing bad will ever last.
The country's dying. People are starving.
I don't want you working yourself to the bone.
You're like every other hick in this town. Scared shitless of losing what you think you have.
And what's that?
A future.
A local guy crashed his car near here the other night. Strangest thing, too. Not a scratch on him.
We're on the brink of nuclear war.
We need a strategic advantage.
Where's the rest of it?
You're supposed to tell me.
What we're dealing with here is a living sample of abiogenesis.
Evolution.
No. Creation.
What's it for? Protection.
From what?
You have to trust me with this, Annie. I won't let them take it away.
Tell me where it is!
You're out of time.
Terminus. So I find this movie, I love this film, by the way, Marc. Thank you for making it. Ajay was the rugged guy in the hat with the smoke and the rough look. Good friend of ours. Unless Marc and you have had and Jai and you have had a breakup since then or something.
Not at all.
Maybe you hate each other now. But that film is incredible, and I can't help but to wonder when I saw that film, because I'm a big UAP. That's what they want us to call them now. UFO buff, and I don't know if you saw the stuff in Congress recently with David Grush telling the people that we have biologicals and that we've been re-engineering alien aircraft since at least the 40s. And all sorts of other interesting stuff in front of Congress. Were you into that side of things, or did you just write this movie for fun?
No, I mean, I've always been interested in it because my grandfather, who raised me for some of my life, he was a UFO fanatic. So I would remember seeing books on his nightstand about UFOs, and we're all always sci-fi film fans, obviously, and huge Star Trek fans. And yeah, so it's hard to not believe. I mean, it's hard to believe that we are the only living entities in this universe.
Ridiculous.
So that's always fascinated me. Yeah. Yes. So that subject has always fascinated me, and then to wrap more geopolitical concerns around science fiction ideas was where Terminus stemmed from.
Cool.
I think that one of the greatest lines in sci-fi from Jodie Foster was, if we are truly alone, then that is an awful waste of space. I mean, just thinking of how vast space and the universe is, and it's just trillions of stars in our galaxy, trillions of galaxies, and really it's just us with all the ingredients that made us out there in the universe. By the way, all those ingredients are out there, and that only we have life. In fact, to me, it's almost impossible. It's almost impossible that's the case.
It is impossible. The odds are. I mean, it's impossible. And some of these things that they're catching lately with the advent of cell phone cameras and the NIDS research at Skinwalker Ranch and all the military stuff that they've declassified, it is obvious that they have been here who knows how long, probably since the beginning, but that's just my opinion.
Right.
Mark, this goes into the nature of reality, right? Which is the topic of our show. What do you think these things are? Do you believe they're here? Do you believe they're watching? Do you believe this guy David Grush that is and the 200 other people that have testified in front of Congress over the years and leaked information?
I mean, I believe there's definitely something out there, but it's always hard to believe, and you have to take everything with a grain of salt when it comes from the U.S. government. I hate to say, or any government in the world
No, it's true.
at any particular time in history, right? Because you always have to question what the underlying agenda is. Why now? Why are we learning about this stuff now? Is it to create a distraction? I mean, I don't want to out myself as a conspiracy theorist because that's a dirty word these days. But
did you know that the conspiracy theory word is actually, you can go back and look, it's a CIA op in order to make us all sound crazy? Yeah.
Yes. No, absolutely. I think a lot of things that CIA ops, some more obvious than others, and either they've had tech from a crash craft since the Roswell incident and have covered it up until now for a very specific reason, or it was always a way to conveniently mask military activities, covert military activities. Who knows? I don't know if we'll ever really know. I think we'll know what the overlords want us to know ultimately. And we can speculate.
There are two main reasons why a government would cover up a UFO, like say Roswell. Two main reasons. One, of course, is panic, and destabilizing, religion. What would religion make of it, et cetera, et cetera. That's one. Two is strategic advantage. Can we take this? Can we reverse engineer this? Can we have an edge against our competitors? And if so, we have to keep that quiet. So those are the two reasons a government has not to disclose something like that. And, those are two, I'm going to say it, pretty powerful reasons not to tell people. That said, I don't think it's right.
When you're a warmongering, class of capitalist species, well, not species, but at least Americans that run the economy through war, like Marc Furmie just mentioned. The overlords will let us know what they want us to know ultimately. Now, I believe the same thing. I hope that we do get to learn something. I don't think it's 1947 anymore. I don't think what's that famous filmmaker that did War of the Worlds on the radio?
Orson Welles. Yeah.
Orson Welles,
right? So
the other Welles.
I don't think if they
the other Welles.
The other Welles. I don't think if they actually showed us these craft and they actually announced to the world for real, and gave us a peek at this tech, that we would panic. It's not 1947 anymore.
I honestly think
we've been
most
slow
people wouldn't
walked.
care.
I don't think most people would care either. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that the craziest part? That's what bothers the most.
They don't care right now. Even with these hearings, they don't care.
You're right, but that is because of slow walking, right? And I think science fiction, to Manu's point about government, in films, has played a large part of that, right? We've been desensitized to the thought of extraterrestrial life. 200 years ago, if a craft would have come down, I mean, think of what that impact would have been. And today, we're so inundated with UFO videos and ancient aliens and on and on and on that eventually, I think, when the government comes out and says, yeah, well, technically they exist, people are going to be like, but it's because we're being slow walked and conditioned to that revelation.
Yeah. Which is unfortunate, because just like it's going completely off topic, but we're staying on the nature of reality. I remember when the Snowden film came out, right? 10 years before the Snowden film came out, I was reading articles in Wired magazine about these huge facilities the government was building to basically record all of our phone calls, get them typewritten and filed, get a file on everyone, and have all these underground storage places to store them. Now, this was 10 years before Snowden. I was reading this in Wired. Nobody cared then. And then Snowden came out with his breaking news that this show and every phone call you make and every email you make is monitored by human beings and AI and recorded, and they're spying on all of us. And nobody cares. I don't know how they pulled that one off, but I think it has to do with the great dumbing down of the nation that started actually when my dad was in school. My dad tells me this story of going to high school, and he was a very smart physicist type brain, mathematical brain. And they brought in these new math books while he was junior, sophomore in high school. And they started teaching math in a different way that was very complicated and stupid and didn't teach you the basic tricks. And he noticed that the textbooks were getting stupider and is that a word? Dumber and dumber. I'm part of the next class of the dumb Americans, right? And it's gotten so bad that I've talked to an English teacher of mine back in AP English in high school that has told me that kids aren't even reading books anymore in this country. They aren't even assigned books. They're assigned chapters of classic novels, and then they're to talk about the chapter. Now, that's how ridiculous our education system has become. And I tend to think, I'll out myself as a conspiracy theorist because I tend to think there's all sorts of nefarious stuff going on. But I tend to think our college intuitions, even at the same time, are dumbing the people down and teaching false information. I always think back to this quote by this guy that ran the CIA in the 70s, and I always forget his name. But the quote is something to the effect of, at some point in America, everything that everyone believes will be entirely false when we're done with our program. I find that insidious and terrifying. And the fact that he said that is terrifying.
In addition, look at what the politicians are doing. Ron DeSantis in Florida, banning certain books, banning, certain literature. You can't say gay, and school kids who might have, two mommies or two daddies, not allowed to talk about it in school in Florida. All these in fact, they were talking about AP psychology, and in Florida, they don't even know if they're going to offer AP psychology because they talk about LGBT, homosexuality, etc.
Oh my God, what a terrible thing to do.
It's part of psychology. It is. And if you can't talk about it, you can't teach it. If you can't teach it, then how can you be in AP psychology? Right? How are they prepping you for a college course in psychology if they can't teach it? It's ridiculous. It was all over CNN last week. And so you have politicians, not the government necessarily, but politicians dumbing down our citizens for one extra vote so they can win the next election. What they will do to normal people to win an election in any country, not just the U.S. Look at Russia. You could look anywhere. They'll. It doesn't matter who dies or who gets hurt or who gets dumbed down, as long as I get the winning votes.
Give me the word, Tyson.
Insidiousness.
Insidiousness. Yeah, I was going to say that.
The insidiousness of the government to do what they do has just become mind-blowing to me. But I want to introduce people to a little bit more of Marc Furmie's work and maybe get on to some more topics that don't bum us out so much about the nature of reality. So let's check out Marc Furmie's reel as a director and writer. And I hope you guys enjoy it. I know you will. Awesome stuff, my friend. Awesome. What is that stuff with the gray? If you can talk about it, the gray zombie-like creatures coming after that guy and surrounding.
That was actually an ad I did in Vietnam. So for about, I don't know, 5 years, I would travel to Vietnam and shoot commercials over there, and it was a bit like the Wild West. So because they hire a lot of foreign directors from Australia and America and UK to come over and shoot these intense ideas. And because production's so cheap there, they often try to push the envelope and do these insane things. So that's that shoot was 28 hours long. So if any place needs a union, it's definitely Vietnam.
Vietnamese actors. Well, lucky you. Vietnam is a beautiful place. It's a beautiful place to be.
And I mean, that's the great thing about being a director is you get to travel the world and meet other people in different cultures. And, I've worked in Cambodia, worked in Thailand, I've worked in South Africa, which is where I was born, but I hadn't. Yeah, amazing place. So I've been very privileged to have that experience, as a director.
I looked up a couple of things that you recently did. Tell me about In Like Flynn. I find that super interesting. I haven't seen the film, but I know it's about Errol Flynn's early life and the adventurous things that he did. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, actually, Robin Hood, by the way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, he was a real triple threat, So that was a project I was actually meant to direct back in 2017 for a producer, a company called 308 out of Canada that were based in LA. We're looking for Australian directors to go to Queensland and make this film based on Errol Flynn's book that he wrote when he was, I think, 22 years old or something like that, called Beam's End. And it was about a maritime journey that he took as a young man from Australia all the way to Papua New Guinea in search of gold. And his ship was wrecked and he lost a friend, and it was pretty intense, but it was a really interesting coming of age tale at the turn of the century, and Errol Flynn was, and had always been a great misogynist, like a notorious womanizer and I guess a typical colonialist of the time, because he went to Papua New Guinea to try exploit the situation there and take advantage of the locals in order to find their gold, but he was just such an interesting character.
Does the movie touch
Absolutely,
on that?
Yeah, it does. It does. So I ended up getting to Queensland. We were 3 weeks from pre-production, and I'd rewritten the script a few times by then. I'd gone back to the source material and really dug into that because I found it was intensely interesting how I at age 20 I could barely take care of myself. I could barely cook. So this guy was traveling the world and fighting cannibals in the jungles of Papua New Guinea. So I found that. So I rewrote the script, and it ultimately ended up being something that I thought was unachievable on the budget that we had. So I ended up leaving the project 3 weeks before principal photography because I could see that under the constraints I was going to have, I wouldn't be able to make the type of film that I wanted to make, which was.
It happens to me all the time. Constantly.
Yeah,
constantly.
You know exactly.
All these people around me tell me, "Oh, we can do it. It's 1.5 million. We can do this huge sci-fi spectacular." And I'm like, "No, you can't."
And look,
I was just gonna say, I'm wondering if Maid Marian was part of the Me Too movement. I did not realize he was a misogynist. I did not know.
No, he was terrible. I think he would.
I knew he was a womanizer for sure. But
I think later in his life he pretty much had a child bride later on in his life, like a underage girl that he was living with. They made a movie about it with Kevin Kline, I believe, was playing the older Flynn. But I think in those days no one was telling men how to behave, especially in this kind of post-industrial age where men didn't have to farm anymore. They didn't have to hunt, you know, and suddenly the world was open to them because of technology and travel and, you know, the
And women
ability
were
to fly.
second-class citizens.
Exactly. It was
Well,
that.
I mean, and just until 2017, the Me Too movement, right? I mean, look
Exactly.
at Weinstein, Harvey Weinstein, and some of the others. It feels like men in positions of power, and I say until recently, but sadly, I think to some extent that's still going on.
Oh, it's still very hard for
Absolutely.
women. Of course,
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
brutal to be a woman in this world.
Yeah. So I wanted to make something that was like a little bit more self-referential, a little bit more meta, and in terms of like Errol Flynn, we know who he is, we know what he's like. I guess the best way to describe what I wanted to achieve was almost something like "Oh brother, where art thou?" You know, that kind of self-aware. But what I was asked to make was actually a retread of Indiana Jones, and I didn't think that was something that I could do with the budget. So I ended up leaving 3 weeks before principal photography, and Russell Mulcahy came on board and took over, and he shot the picture, and it's fine. You know, he did. He's a great director. He was able to wrangle it and pull it together. But I was satisfied with the decision that I made to come off that project because, you know, it wouldn't have been something I was proud of.
Yeah, I understand. I understand completely. Tell me, with the strike and with this time to sit back and write and prepare for when we're all working again, what are you working on now? Can you share anything?
Yeah, absolutely. For the last, since that Errol Flynn incident or episode in my life, I came back to the States. You know, I'd just moved to LA from Australia, and I'd been in development on a number of projects based on true stories, and then a bunch of genre films. So I tend to step into one of those two camps at any given time. I was asked to adapt a number of true stories, one of which was a biopic about one of Australia's most famous war generals. His name was Sir John Monash. He was Jewish, and he was a military tactician who was known as the father of modern warfare because he was basically one of the inventors of combined arms, which is the use of combined plane, artillery, tanks, infantry at the same time. And so he was instrumental in the First World War in breaking the Hindenburg Line, which they said was impenetrable, but encountered a lot of, you know, anti-Semitism among, you know, coming from the British aristocracy within the military, you know, because to be an officer, you had to be like a noble lord at the time, most of the time, but he managed to work his way up.
World War I.
First World War, yes. Yeah. So I that was a monumentally ambitious project I had to write and learn how to adapt. And there's an A-lister, I can't mention his name, interested in directing that project at the moment. I also adapted the true story of the 1958 attempted assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. by a woman named Isola Curry during a book signing in Harlem. And that film is called Harlem 58. And we were in late stage development, early pre-production on that before the strike happened. Had begun casting. That was stalled. Yep. And I'm working with elders from the Blackfoot Nation in Montana on a supernatural thriller, kind of a M. Night Shyamalan-esque supernatural thriller about generational trauma. And it's pretty much about a white family who own fee land on the Blackfoot Nation, set in 1970. It's about the theft of oil from Blackfoot land, and I know Martin Scorsese's upcoming film deals with a similar theme. You know, the theft of natural resources from
DiCaprio film.
One thing that impresses me, Marc, is your spectrum, right? So you historical, nonfiction, documentary type, all the way to futuristic sci-fi, alien. I mean, that's quite a spectrum.
Yeah, Marc Furmie does not let himself get pigeonholed.
Right.
The dude is an artist. He writes.
I think the thread. I mean, and it's an unconscious thing as an artist, right? You don't consciously seek out the stories; they kind of come to you. But if I had to pick a thread, it would just be these untold stories of truth. Like no one knows what the Blackfoot people have had to suffer in the 100 years since this particular massacre, the Marias River massacre that we deal with in the film in 1870. No one knows that King was almost killed, and 10 years of civil rights history would have disappeared. Nobody knows that a Jewish German general who suffered anti-Semitism actually helped defeat the Germans in World War I. So I think what I like, and the same thing with Terminus, that story was about uncovering the possibility that it always takes one person to make a significant decision to change history, and that person could be a mechanic in a small American town. So I think that's what I enjoy. I enjoy stories that are unexpected and about some measure of truth about the human condition.
Right on. I wonder how you track those stories down, or do you? A lot of stuff comes your direction, and that's what you find most interesting.
If I could answer that question too, I just want to add, how much of you are in those stories? Because a director or writer always puts, I could look at the world, you could look at the world, and we're going to see two slightly different truths. So how much of you goes into that film?
Yeah. A lot of these stories have come to me. I haven't chased them down. So I formed a production company in 2018 called Resistor Films with a couple of partners, and our whole impetus was to just recreate the business a little bit, and that's why I'm interested in artists banding together to create their own studio.
Oh, like paying back the investors and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, what an interesting idea.
Well, that would be part of it. Yeah, exactly. But no, these stories have come to me. I think just when you make a decision to commit yourself to something bigger than yourself and your own ego, and a lot of ego death happened to me when I walked away from that Flynn film, because I couldn't afford to do that. I had a family and 2 small children to support. But I basically came to this moment of reckoning where I'm like, well, I'm not going to tell stories unless they mean something. And then suddenly, people began contacting me with stories. The Harlem 58 story, the Martin Luther King assassination attempt story, that came to me through an African-American friend of mine who lives in Australia, who's an immigrant from Australia, who had basically his aunt was the anesthesiologist in the room when his life was being saved, and he asked me to write the story, and I said, no, I that's something I can never relate to, because I'm not African American, I don't have that experience. And I said to him, well, okay, I'll do the first couple of drafts, but you need to go and you need to get somebody who is can lend an authentic voice to the story. But I had such a incredible experience writing the story, and it pretty much wrote itself, to be honest, because it was a contained story. It all takes place in 72 hours. It's about his life hanging in the balance, and it's about the surgeon, not just about the woman who tries to kill him, but about the black surgeon who saves his life, who never got the credit for it. And so I think to come full circle with your question, what do I put of myself into these stories? Well, I feel like an underdog, and very much these stories are all about underdogs. Jai in Terminus was an underdog. No one believed that he'd seen what he'd seen, and he persisted. The surgeon who saves King's life is an underdog. Sir John Monash was an underdog. I'm also working on a story about 2 young Australians who were convicted of and tried for drug trafficking in Indonesia in 2005 and were sentenced to death and spent 10 years on death row. But during their 10 years on death row, changed the entire prison system in Indonesia, in Karabokan prison in Indonesia. And
was the drug trafficking weed?
It was heroin, actually. So no.
Okay.
Yeah, they knew. I mean, they were naive. They were very young. They knew the consequences, but I guess they were young and stupid, and
they were kids.
By their own admission, yeah, they were kids, and I just don't believe in the death penalty. So this is a very touching story about rehabilitation.
Dennis says, in Canada, films are easier for filmmakers as the government has roughly about 5 agencies. that help with bursaries, equipment loaning, funding, and production help. This is another thing that's drastically missing in America. In Europe, all across Europe, you have film grants, film funds, art funds, and for some reason in our country, we just can't get it together to realize how important telling the stories that Marc's been talking about, the stories that all of us artists want to make. We should have big film grants. We should have federally funded art instead of federally funded war. And
and in U.S. schools, what's the first thing they cut? Not the sports programs.
The art programs.
Not the sports programs. Yeah, always the art programs. Always.
Yeah. We in Australia, we're very privileged. We have a similar system to Canada, and honestly, I wouldn't have been able to start my career if it weren't for that. That's how I met Jai, making a short film called Death's Requiem, which was financed by the Australian government, and they gave us $200,000 to make that short film. I mean, that's a lot of money for a short film. But it allows careers to start. Death's Requiem.
Death's Requiem.
And it played a method first.
Where can people
see it? It's on YouTube. It's on YouTube. I can post it.
Now, Marc, you
also Dave just said he was amazed by Harlem 58. He'd never heard the story, and I think that's his point. He brings stories to the masses that have never been heard. I'm really interested in this Blackfoot. Basically the raping of their oil, etc., and what happened there. This massacre at where did you call
so
it?
in 1870 there was an incident where a couple of Blackfoot young men stole horses, right? And they were accused of murdering the owner of the horses. And there was a general named Major Baker, a military a major named Baker, who was assigned with hunting and hunting down and killing these horse thieves. But in his party was a Blackfoot Native American who was married to somebody within the tribe that he was assigned to hunt down. So this guy led him to a different tribe that had nothing to do with this incident. They were camped out on the bank of the Marias River, and 200 of them, a lot of them sick with smallpox. The men were out hunting somewhere at a butte far away, and they're all slaughtered, 200 of them. And the U.S. government never atoned for this or acknowledged it, and it was just buried. So, descendants of survivors still exist today in Montana and still deal with the ramifications of that. So I had a script that was sent to me that I was attached to direct that had a supernatural theme to it, but I wanted to ground it in something real. And so I began to do research, and it led me to the Blackfoot people, but I didn't want to include their story in the script until I had their blessing and their permission and their inclusion and collaboration. So I went to Montana. I went to Browning to visit the tribal elders, and I spent a week with them, and they gave me a lot of knowledge about the massacre. They took me out to the massacre site. They'd done that for a very few number of people. Also helped that I'm Australian, because I think there would be a bit more skeptical if it was an American, to be honest.
An American. I have a question. You talked about, being born in South Africa, growing up in Australia, coming here to the U.S., making movies in the U.S. So I have to, and you talked about being an underdog, that I have to imagine, and I mean this in a kind way, I really do, but I believe you may have experienced some bigotry, some prejudice in your own life, and that kind of helps that perspective. My mother is Native American. You can't tell by looking at me. I look milkman white, but she was Native American. My grandfather was Native American. I grew up very familiar with the Native American way, and I have seen firsthand the bigotry, the awfulness, and I have to wonder, have you experienced any kind of personally bigotry, prejudice, within the different countries you've lived and worked, and does that inform some of what you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think because my mother fled South Africa because of her identity, because she grew up in apartheid and,
Right.
had dark skin and, couldn't go to certain schools. In fact, her complexion, being the eldest child of 6, is much darker than my uncle, who's, the kids got lighter because my grandparents were mixed race. My grandmother was, she's part Western European, but then my grandpa was Middle Eastern. So we're all over the place. I personally am half Indian, so I'm a little bit different to my mother. Obviously, my experience growing up, I didn't spend enough time in South Africa to be able to give you an informed idea of what that was like. That comes from my mother. But growing up in Australia, yes, as children in high, kids are very cruel. Australia was very white at the time, but the schools I always went to had a lot of immigrants. I went to very diverse types of schools. Went to schools with a lot of Asian kids. I went to school in the outback with a lot of Indigenous Australian kids.
Oh, cool.
The white kids would beat me up on the way to school, and the Indigenous Australian kids would beat me up on the way home. So I couldn't win really there because I didn't fit in. It's very tribalistic in Australia. So there's racism coming from different ethnic groups towards different other ethnic groups. In Australia, the racism is a little bit more, in your face. I think maybe in America it's a little bit more subtle. It's spoken about behind your back. I haven't lived here long enough to be able to speak, with other than what I've experienced, from other people's stories, what it's like being a person of color in America. I live in Los Angeles. It's a pretty diverse place. I can't speak to, bigotry here. I haven't really
it's a strange
encountered
thing.
too much of it.
The east and west coasts of our country are quite nice as far as a melting pot and the idea of America as it's supposed to be. And then the further
but everything in the middle,
it seems.
But I will say that having traveled through many states in the middle too, like Arizona and Idaho and Montana, I must just have an anomalous experience because
there's great people everywhere.
Yeah,
there
absolutely,
is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I will say that I've probably encountered a lot of ignorance, just naivete about other people's cultures. Here, a lot of Americans haven't even left the country. But in terms of malicious racism, not much here, to be honest. So
I use bigotry purposely as opposed to racism. For example, and I'm not going to out Manu. He's outed himself. He's openly bisexual. I'm a gay man, and I grew up in East County in the '80s. And I'll tell you, I used to get my ass kicked after school more often than I could count. And you would look at me and say, okay, he's a white guy. He's male. He's any
a part of the Coast Guard.
Racial. Yeah. I am now, but from a racial standpoint, somebody might look at me and say, well, you've never experienced racism. Maybe not, but I've experienced bigotry. And by the way, racism, I have. And I really don't understand it. You see little children on a beach, black, white, Indian, Mexican, all the, they don't know it.
No.
So it tells me that racism isn't ingrained, it's taught. And bigotry is taught.
Yeah.
And it kills me that we teach such awful things when that time and energy could be used constructively to benefit mankind.
On a positive note, we've only been trying to do this, honestly, for 70 years. This idea of real equal rights. Giving women the vote, giving minorities the vote, making black and white people equal. This idea is relatively new, and so anytime people get down on how we haven't made it very far, we've been working on this for 20 years. 70 years. It's a relatively new idea, and so I think generationally the kids below us are doing much better than we are.
Right.
I think it's going to work itself out. I hope. So
I
we
think
do,
Cassie is giving us a sign
yeah,
here.
I've forgotten. If you wanted
You've
to,
forgotten
You
our
forgot.
wonderful family that's always on
that's all
standby.
wants to talk, and we're overtime, and I'm so sorry, but we have some guests that want to ask Marc a question. So let's start with I think Katie. Sorry.
Katie's kind of catty. I think it's okay. Good morning, Katie.
I've been
I
called
always say
worse. Don't worry
Katie.
about it, love.
I don't know why.
No, I've been called much worse. And that's going on what Tyson was saying about the hate and bigotry.
I love how the word I don't want to get canceled, but CUNT is used in your country. It's fantastic.
Oh,
In
And
Australia,
our country just doesn't understand it. I think she's from England.
yes.
Yeah.
We are over 18 or whatever on all
Oh,
of the
I can say it.
platforms, I believe.
It's such a dangerous word here in this.
This is dangerous thoughts.
Yeah.
We know the word.
Well, see, in England, you can say you're a right cunt, and it just means you're a dick.
In Australia, in
Or
Australia
the
we tend to
Thunderkind.
use it more toward men. Like it's actually
Oh yeah, that
men
is so
call
true.
other
It's the
men.
same here as well.
Yeah.
And
it's
the
the same
lefties
here as well.
and the lefties, which pretty much I am one, but the lefties get so bent out of shape on that word because it's used towards men and then used in a derogatory fashion. But for me, I think for the history of time, we've been calling people by their genitalia. You go back to putz with Jewish and putz is a penis. We call each other penises and vaginas. I think it's okay. So anyway, go ahead, Katie.
No, going on the sci-fi versus reality thing. We've always on Dangerous Thoughts we've discussed about reality and multiple realities, i.e. the multiverse. And I was just wondering, Marc, what do you think about the reality of the multiverse and there being an infinite number of alternate realities? And like kind of on the same question as well, do you think that there's a reality out there where the human race aren't a bunch of sniveling snowflakes?
Yeah, I mean, I think just by
No
virtue
pressure.
of the fact, string theory is something that's still hypothetical, but it's very easy to see that by virtue of the fact that we have the ability to choose, that multiple universes are spawning out of our decisions every moment. Somewhere there is, if not in physical reality, but the possibility, the energy of the other choice, And I think by that very nature, the fact that, I believe consciousness is in itself another universe. I believe that we are probably each intersections of multiple planes of reality at any given time, whether it's an emotional reality, the idea of love and consciousness. These things can't be seen. They don't exist in physical reality as we perceive it. So I think we are living testaments to the idea of a multiverse. And it's always I think that's why people are so fascinated with exploring that subject in films, because we're always in constant states of questioning where our other choices would lead, and what that means, and audiences are becoming more savvy to that idea. You can see it in the plots in movies are now much more dense and complex when it comes to exploring
Just
the
this
multiverse
year,
idea.
Everything Everywhere All at Once wins the Oscar.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which was great.
Yes, it was. It was wonderful. 28
Did that answer your question?
It does, yeah. But then there was the next part of my question of, do you think there's a reality out there where the human race aren't a bunch of sniveling snowflakes?
No.
No. Yeah.
Because
I had a feeling.
Because then we'd cease to be human beings. We'd cease to have the ability to choose. And unfortunately, the ability to choose and free will comes with the ability to be CUNTs, right?
Yeah. So basically, the human race is always going to be a bunch of cunts.
I hope not.
Yeah.
but
you know, the I think that you don't have a yardstick to measure goodness unless you have the complete opposite. You know, I think how do you measure love without the ability to hate? You know, how do you measure a moral choice? You know, if it's between two equally, you know, it has to be between two equally difficult choices. That's what makes us
I believe
human
that was
beings.
Satan's point in South Park the movie. That was exactly
there
Satan's
you go.
point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Red Baron,
but
shit, after that chat, I'm gonna need a cigarette.
I mean, and that's, you know, we are human beings judge themselves pretty harshly too, you know, and I think that to say that we're all horrible, that's our own complexities, you know, dawning through our. If we all started to see ourselves as worthwhile and as beautiful creatures, maybe we'll see each other as that too. You know,
there's an old saying in one of our. There's an old saying. What if we could see each other the way we see ourselves?
Yeah,
I mean, I think most of us hate ourselves. That's the problem, you know. So maybe.
Well, we self-doubt. We all of us are filled with self-doubt, and we fight it constantly. I don't think we all hate ourselves, because I actually think that most people are genuinely good people. What I worry about is the technologies out there that allow one bad person to create so much devastation to the rest of us. That's my biggest worry.
Hey, I don't know about you guys. I do love myself. Once a day, usually around 9 p.m. But yeah.
Hey, it's an expression of loving yourself.
So structured, Tyson. So structured.
You lonely bastard.
I keep it on a schedule.
Oh, we all masturbate. Right. Just stop it. Even Marc Furmie masturbates. All right, we're gonna end this with. We're gonna end this with. Well,
we have two more.
Two more. Okay, who's next?
Oh wow.
Next up, we have Zach.
Okay, Zach. Hit us with your question for Marc Furmie. We're not seeing an image of you. Hopefully, we can hear you.
Well, hopefully you can. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, we can hear you.
Right. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with my camera, but
that's all right.
It's not working. But
looks like you're a fan of what was that, Red Tide? Or no, that Oklahoma, or is that
Ohio State?
That's Ohio State. That's right.
OH. Yeah, standing over Devin Gardner. Yeah, back in the day. But
go ahead.
I guess my question is, it pertains towards the AI standpoint of the day, and me coming from like an Austrian standpoint and human action and being very concise with Mises, I think that human beings can certainly adapt. But what are your thoughts on the idea of AI, and what are the positives and what are the what are the cons, and what can sci-fi teach us?
It's a very sci-fi topic, that's for
sure. Very sci-fi.
Yeah,
topic.
And I mean, reality topic too.
Yeah, I mean, I'll could probably answer that in two parts. I think as it pertains to the film industry as a writer, is probably a good stepping off point, and then a larger existential question of it. But I think as a writer, I mean, I think it's the fear of AI taking over and writing screenplays is, you know, I can feel a certain way about it at 9 a.m. and then feel completely differently about it at 10 p.m. You know, it's just a changing world that's incredibly difficult to predict where it's going to go. I think if anything, the greatest danger of AI is it's going to make us lazier, you know, because when we start getting it to do the thinking for us, it's going to mean that the content we produce or the art we produce is going to be a little more watered down. But on the flip side, it does create efficiencies, right? So for instance, I've experimented with it for research purposes. You know, I'll ask it certain things that are harder to ask Google, about specific science things that I don't know about, was recently writing a script about what kind of science would be necessary for a cure for cancer, and to kind of like type that into Google, you just get a bunch of op-eds or journals that you would never be able to kind of decipher into your own language. So AI takes that step and can kind of, it can also work as a kind of an assistant for you. It can never write a script for you. That's the thing I've very quickly learned, because I think that's what every writer wanted to test was, can it do our job for us? In which case, shit, we're all screwed. But I don't think it can. I think you can give it parameters and a number of different, signposts to achieve a certain, element of what you're creating, but it can never do the whole thing, and it will never create any kind of subjectivity. I think for directors,
it can write a wonderful college paper.
Yeah, I mean, look, and that's the moral question is, have we as human beings with computers in our skulls been appropriating a form of AI? It's organic intelligence, but functions in the same way. Have we been doing that when we've been reading Dostoevsky and reading Immanuel Kant and then reinterpreting their philosophies into a college paper? Have we not been plagiarizing in some respect? So will it allow us to achieve a greater level of consciousness where we are standing on the shoulders of giants in a more...
I was about to say that. You just plucked it from my head.
Yeah.
Well, and to what degree?
Way.
And to what degree are we cheating? For when I was in school, okay, in the 80s, maybe 90s, really 80s. I'm not gonna lie, it's 80s. We were told you need to put your calculators away and do the math, by hand. But as we got older, we started using the calculators, and it did the math for us. Now that's a really simplified example of AI today, now doing kind of that research for us. At what point does AI and robotics begin taking over the hard, the laborious, the deep physical work and thinking to make our lives easier? And where is that delineation from making our lives easier to replacing us?
First of all, sorry, Mark, but AI, right, is honestly one of the most terrifying things to me in the world right now. I think it could be used for positivity, and if a massive rally for policing of this technology and what it's used for is created, we might survive it. But you were just talking about cancer and cancer research, right? I just recently watched a program where we saw this guy who decided that he was trying to make drugs that would treat these different diseases through AI. And then some think tank came to him and said, well, what's the worst case scenario for the technology you're using for it to be used nefariously? And all he had to do was change a 1 to a 0 and make the AI look for toxicity instead of things that can help these diseases. And the next day, 24 hours later, they came back. This was in Cambridge, I think. And they came back and they had on their hard drive like thousands of the most dangerous chemicals that have never been seen before, neural agents, deadly, that had never been created in the history of mankind. So there's very dangerous applications for this stuff, and the idea that everybody can use it and everybody can get their hands on it if you have access to funding or even just a little bit of wealth, it's scary. And you were halfway through your answer.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, just to go back, does Oppenheimer create the atomic bomb if Einstein didn't exist? And then now, what if Einstein's AI? Does that free up Oppenheimer to create the atomic bomb? Does it give, because now he doesn't have to work out the theory of relativity. He can just go straight to making the bomb. So that's the question, is like, is it going to create innovation or is it going to stifle innovation? And that's the question. And then, yes, obviously the moral Terminator dealt with that question many years ago, as did the Matrix. It's like, will this machine enslave us and become our new god? I mean, I can guarantee you somewhere out there, some lonely people are already forming relationships with GTP because it's probably treating them with more respect than most human beings. At least now.
There are. I saw a documentary on that too.
People and I think that as the problem, the interesting thing is there's going to be a conflict between writers and directors and actors, because directors will be able to utilize AI in a way, say, for pitching projects. Now you can basically use AI animation. You can create fully animated sequences just through prompts. And yes, that's a great thing as if you're a director and you want to pitch your vision, but will it ultimately then, put Manu out of work, as an actor, because how long before we're able to achieve photoreal replicates, that are able to act with them, with
extras won't be
as much nuance.
They're saying within 5-6 years extras won't be needed, and this is the thing that keeps.
I mean, they've been phasing extras out anyway for years. We got even pre-AI. I mean, if you look at Lord of the Rings, to create those big battle sequences, you'd take 50 extras or 100 extras, replicate them over and over again. That's not a new thing, and I mean, that's not the hat that I think anyone should hang their hat on. With the AI,
no, but
thing,
I think
it's
we're
more
talking about like the guys right behind you in the restaurant, Joe from
right,
yeah, like, those guys are not going to be needed anymore, and that's
yeah.
terrible.
Well, as soon as it becomes cheaper to replace an extra with a complete digital, yes,
Well, to that point, why stop at an extra? What why not replace an actor?
No, why not?
It's going to happen. It is going to happen. It's going to happen eventually.
It's very scary to me as a writer. I even as a producer, I just used AI to save myself thousands and thousands of dollars on green screen pulls. The computer learning was able to do a lot of the green screen pulls, at least to a point where then I could then hire somebody to finish it. And those kind of things, like that takes away money from people, from people's pockets. And
I do have a really quick, because we have to get to our last speaker. Before we do, Marc, are you familiar with the 1990s Budweiser commercials?
Yeah,
because there is a commercial where they say, "What's up? What's up? What's up?" And then in Scary Movie, remember that where they did the "What's up?" Okay, we're going to introduce our last speaker.
Is Chris Leftwich on the show?
Yes, he is.
What's up?
What's up? We got to do the "What's up?" What's up? That's the way we introduce Chris.
You were in those commercials, Chris?
No.
Oh, you weren't.
But
he
drinks plenty. He drinks plenty of Bud Light. So,
Great.
We started this show as a podcast that was just on Twitter. That was and Chris was always our closer, and every once in a while he'll show up on our live show these days. So we're happy to have him. Hey, Chris. So what do you got for Marc?
Yeah, I'm with you on the AI, Manu. What really disturbs me about AI is it's with AI. I mean, you take this, you guys have seen the Boston Dynamics robots. I think that's the name of the company. Yeah. And you imagine, number one, mounting guns to those things and then programming them to kill. Yeah, that's
DARPA's all over.
Right. Yeah, I don't get that. Oh, and real quick, that Terminus film looks awesome, dude. That looks badass.
Yes.
Watch it. Where's Terminus available, by the way?
Where can we watch it?
I think it's on Tubi now. It's on Tubi for free. You can watch it there.
Okay.
Cool.
What about Amazon? Can we pay to watch it?
Yeah, you can
try
pay
to
watch
buy it on Amazon first.
I mean, just watch it on Tubi because it's Tubi have probably paid the producers of the film, so you don't need to feel guilty about not paying.
Okay, then we can watch it on Tubi. I'm happy to rent it on Amazon or whatever, but if Tubi is where the money is, because I believe that the actors and everybody involved ought to get paid. But I want to watch it. That looks awesome.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
it did. It looked badass.
Chris,
Yes.
I
Yo.
just watched a documentary on AI killer robots that was on Netflix. Our militaries are taking this stuff extremely seriously. Our Army, Navy, Air Force, Space Force, etc. They all have these small, well, not small, they're relatively gigantic, but these Skynet type of programs that they are thinking about turning over control of somewhere in the future to have an advanced AI, control over our armed
Except for
forces.
Coast Guard. Coast Guard.
Okay, so
They
Coast
don't
Guard
jump in
doesn't
and
have
save
one,
people.
thank God.
They don't jump
Okay,
in and save
so
people.
And
like
AI
be
is
just-
smoking our best our best chess. It started with the chess players, then the video game players. Now it's smoking our best pilots in the Air Force, flying F-15s, F-24s, or Raptors, whatever they're called. Our pilots are losing to the AI 99.9% of the time. So they're thinking about, turning over control to all of these billion-dollar kill machines
so that they can bomb us in return.
stuff.
And
Yeah.
So
That's
there would
just
be
how
no
Terminator
human,
started.
there would be no human interaction at all. It would simply just be a computer thinking and doing what it does.
In the Ukraine, in the war in the Ukraine, they've already had experiences of giving over to the AI killer robot the ability to decide whether to make the kill or not. So
Facial recognition.
Recognition. It doesn't know the difference between a child coming over with a bomb and a combatant coming over with a bomb. It can't tell the difference, so it's going to decide to smoke them.
What was the name of that documentary? Because I'm going to check that
out. Man, I wish I knew. It was called, I think it's just called Killer Robots or AI Killer Robots on Netflix.
Killer Robots, okay.
Yeah. Scary documentary. Really, really scary.
Really quick. Red Baron's asking, is this going to be released on DVD? A lot of us, with streaming, things come and go. I was trying to watch Angels in the Outfield. It's not on Disney. I can't find it anywhere. That's why I buy the DVD.
I'll answer Marc for him. Almost everything that he's done has been released on DVD at some point. So if you search hard enough, you can probably buy it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if there's a US region DVD out there, but I'm sure there is, because Vertical Entertainment, they released it in 2016, and DVDs were still around then. So I'm sure.
Speaking of Marc, Resistance Entertainment, is that your company?
Resistor Films, yeah.
Resistor. Okay, so how can people support Resistor Films? And I know you've got a slate of films that you're trying to fund. If anybody's an interested investor, how can they contact you and get involved?
They can contact me on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter. I don't really use Twitter much, but I'll see messages. But yeah,
at Marc Furmie or at Resistor Films?
No, at Marc Furmie. Yeah.
And by the way, if you can go ahead and confirm me as a friend on Twitter, because I requested you like 2 days ago, and it was like nothing.
Okay.
He's like, I don't know who this
I
Tyson
didn't tell Marc
is.
that you were my co-host.
I don't.
Well, I barely used it since it became this X thing. It's just
right. Me too.
It just looks like a porn site now. I mean, it always was.
It always was.
Well, I'm the pirate guy on the porn site. So
Subscript pirate. Yeah. If you want to appear on the show, and he's not, he doesn't show his wiener. But if you want to appear on the show, contact Subscript Pirate at X. I actually think X, and not that I'm a huge fan of Elon Musk, but I think X is going to be a pretty phenomenal social media site if you dig that stuff. I think he's going to do a lot of things with it. I read an article recently about his plans for it, and me and Cassie were talking about it recently. I think it's X is going to be a real player in that field. So.
Yeah, I think it was a
Chris. Go ahead.
Game,
I cut you off. Did you have a specific question for Marc, or anything else you want to say about the nature of reality?
The nature of reality, the string theory thing. That's interesting. There's just so much to go into. what is a black hole? Where does it go? What does it do? Does it lead to another galaxy? Does it lead to another universe? I personally think that I think that there's a black hole in the center of every galaxy. It's what keeps them, spiral. And I think that they soak up so much mass, and it just like swells like a bubble, and they get so big and so big and so big and so big, and then boom, creates a universe. Now, in my theory, imagine an ocean with raindrops coming down. Each one of those is a big bang. So in my theory, there would be quintillions of universes with quintillions of galaxies with God knows how many freaking planets. And there ain't no telling what we're going to find out there. There's just no telling.
I'm with you.
Well, we don't know. We don't know what we know in the physics term what likely caused the Big Bang, but we don't know what was before that. Or what. So definitely.
I also think scale really doesn't exist within the universe. Like there could be a planet of intelligent beings just like us that have technology and all this good stuff that are the size of Smurfs. There could be a planet just like us, intelligent beings and all that, and they're 150 feet tall. We don't know. I think that would depend on the size of the planet itself.
Absolutely possible.
The bigger a planet would be, the bigger the life forms would have to grow to compensate for the gravitational field,
or the smaller and stockier they might be to compensate for the.
I read an interesting article about the idea that we could. I just lost my train of thought. That sucks so bad. What were you just talking about? Yeah, I'm way old, but what were you just talking about?
Galaxies, scale.
Galaxy scale. Anyway, I just read this incredibly interesting book, and this is a completely different thought, but that reality itself could actually be completely the opposite of what everybody believes, and that human beings ourselves could be the creators of reality. It was called it's written by two incredible scientists, the guy that first cloned sheep and a physicist. And their hypothesis is that, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, it doesn't fall. And that the nature of our universe is actually coming from the observer. One of the sci-fi projects that I'm working on now called Star Crew, it all revolves around the theme and the hypothesis that conscious beings that tell stories are the reason that the universe and all of reality exists. If you write Moby Dick, you actually create a universe in its entirety. If you make a video game, you create a universe in its entirety. If you make a movie called Alien, you create a universe in its entirety. That everything that when the program started, Marc was talking about stories coming from the ether. It almost feels like they come from out there, and we're receptors, and as writers, we write them down. And I think to some respect that could be true, that storytellers could create the universe, because as a conscious entity, as a sentient entity, what else is there to do once we become conscious and once we become self-aware but to dream and to tell stories? And so, the interesting idea in my show Star Crew that we're trying to get off the ground next year is that stories within stories within stories, and storytellers, who is the prima mobile, the ultimate storyteller, is the reason that the universe exists and goes
well.
forward.
And I think that goes back to Schrodinger's cat, right? It doesn't exist until it's observed, and that is a great storyline, because it's like anything could be reality if conditioned and observed.
We know from
right?
from so many things. I can't remember the name of the experiment, but just the fact that we look at something alters the experiment.
Well, light, for example, it's both it's a particle and it's a wave, and it behaves differently if it's being observed. That's long been in physics, And that is interesting. I mean, it does lend itself to that idea of Schrodinger's cat, right? It lends itself to the idea of
consciousness actually creates reality.
Yeah, something being observed changes reality, and that to the old saying, if a tree falls in the forest, if nobody's there to hear it, doesn't make a sound. You know, that is a version of Schrodinger's cat. It is a version of without observation, and there's nothing there to hear it.
So they're able to hear it, right? So anyway,
well,
Chris,
if a tree falls in the forest, wouldn't the animals hear it?
Yeah, they would.
Something has to hear it. Yeah,
some consciousness has to hear it. That's the idea.
If a tree falls in space, how did it get there?
So we've gone 35 minutes over time, and I want to thank Marc Furmie for hanging out with us all this time.
Thank you, guys.
Great show. Thank you for coming on. Please watch Marc Furmie's work. Get in contact with him if you're interested in helping him.
And come back to this show.
Done.
We have to invite him back to the show. He was an amazing
I would love
guest.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, thank you.
When this strike is over and one of your new projects comes out, we'd love to have you on. And
yes,
actually, we'd love to have you on anytime you want to come on. You're a good friend, and thanks for doing the show. And thanks for having an interesting,
thank you guys.
Psychological conversation with us. It was awesome to see your work. Check out Marc Furmie's work at Marc Furmie on all the Facebooks. Also check out Resistor Films. And give him a shout if you want to invest in any of the wonderful things that he's doing. An incredible filmmaker on the cusp of becoming a Spielberg of his own right. So give this guy a hand and team up with him. Otherwise, we'll see you on Dangerous Thoughts next week. I'm Manu Ente Reme. This is my co-host, Tyson Strasberg. And we'll see you next week.
See y'all later.
Bye-bye.